The US has traditionally seen Africa as a problem to be solved, while China sees Africa as a place of opportunity. This simple sentence is the easiest way to understand the different approaches both China and the US have had towards Africa, and as a result, this is what's happening. Since China launched its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative 10 years ago, 149 countries around the globe have joined, including 49 of the 54 countries in Africa. This is now a major concern for the US government. Africa is one of the wealthiest continents in the world, blessed with some of the world's most valuable resources, minerals, and commodities. The United States has always had a strategic interest in Africa, but that interest has always been in the resources of the continent and not for the future development of African people. In today's video, I'm going to highlight some of the mistakes the US has made and why many African countries are now looking to China for future growth. In addition, let's also highlight some of the groundbreaking Belt and Road projects from China that have changed Africa's future. For many Africans, their perception of China has changed because they can see the tangible results of China entering the continent. 100,000 kilometers of road, 10,000 kilometers of railway, over 1,000 bridges, 100 ports, and scores of hospitals and schools. These are the type of projects that give hope to future generations and provide pathways for living a better quality of life. Instead of making similar infrastructure investments in Africa, the US government's primary objective is lecturing African leaders on the dangers of working with China, in hopes that the US can somehow reverse the trend of Chinese investment into Africa. This strategy is not respectful to African nations because the US assumes African leaders don't know how to make the best decisions for their own countries. Here was what Macky Sall, the president of the African Union, recently stated: "When we talk, we're often not listened to, or in any case, not with enough interest. This is what we want to change. And let no one tell us, no, don't work with so-and-so, just work with us. We want to work and trade with everyone." 20 years ago, the US dominated trade in Africa, while China had almost zero presence in the continent. Chinese leaders didn't sit down and strategize on how to stop the United States in Africa. China simply launched its own plans to grab their market share. Fast forward to today, and China is clearly winning the race. In 2022, China's trade with Africa reached $261 billion, an amount nearly 5 times that of the United States. But a statistic that is even more important and really shows how effective China's mission in Africa has been is a recent poll which found 77% of African youth believe China is the most important partner for the future success of their country. But how did America lose its position as leader in Africa? It comes down to one simple mistake. The US government often disrespects smaller, developing countries. Let me explain. When the United States wants to engage with Africa, it treats the continent as one place and fails to address each country individually. When China deals with Africa, it deals with each country individually, giving respect and the chance for each country to voice their individual concerns and needs to China. The lack of respect existing in US foreign policy is a major concern. Listen to what this diplomat from Zimbabwe had to say.
What really is behind the failure of effective engagement with Africa is the disrespect of the Africans. That's where the problem begins. It's always the United States setting the agenda, the United States setting the policies, and the United States telling the Africans about the policies. That is no way to have any meaningful engagement.
Last December, Joe Biden hosted 49 African heads of state in Washington, D.C. for the US-Africa Leaders Summit. Once again, the main objective of the summit was to convince African leaders the United States is a better trading partner than China. But once again, notice the American mistake here. Instead of focusing on our own investments and genuinely wanting to help the people of Africa, the entire goal of the summit was to convince African leaders that America is good and China is bad. Ultimately, it left very few Africans feeling any confidence moving forward.
There was a lot of criticism of the last summit like this under President Obama, that there was like no follow through. And what I'm hearing from you is frankly a lot of disappointment and a lot of pessimism about what may come out of this summit.
Nothing is going to come out of it because it is a one-sided conversation. So the fact that it is a one-sided conversation, that is yet going to be another useless meeting with no outcomes. The reason this is happening is because there is a disrespect for the Africans. There is a general feeling that we don't need to hear from the Africans. Their opinions do not matter. President Biden would not pick up and go to meet with any other leader in the world without an agenda. That simply doesn't happen.
Right.
So what makes the US think that they can engage African leaders without an agenda.
Once again, the US government set the agenda, set the policies, and informed the African leaders to follow America's plan. Without listening to the needs and want of African leaders, how can any meaningful change be made? Unfortunately, the US-Africa summit was a complete waste of time and will result in no change. We know this to be true because this is the exact same thing that happened in 2014 when President Obama hosted his own version of the US-Africa Leaders Summit. 8 years later, and the US still hasn't learned how to correctly treat Africans.
The United States must understand that Africans are not going to take it anymore. If you don't treat the Africans fairly, United States is going to see itself slowly losing ground to China, to Russia, to all other nations, because without respecting the Africans, without treating the Africans as equal, without understanding that exploitation and abuse of Africa simply cannot continue.
Now that we've established the reason behind China overtaking the US, let's shift our focus to highlighting some of the key infrastructure projects that China has built and how these projects have shaped many Africans' perception of China. Let's start with the 760-kilometer Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, which connects the capitals of Ethiopia and Djibouti. France was the first country to build a railway between these two countries and did so over 100 years ago. However, the railway had already ceased operation for over 10 years before China came in to rebuild it. Completed in 2016, the new railway has quickly become one of the most important infrastructure projects in the Horn of Africa region, and according to this article from the Ethiopian Monitor, has increased its contribution to Ethiopia's import and export trade by 15%, recording revenues of $47 million in the first 6 months of its most recent fiscal year. Earlier I mentioned China has constructed over 1,000 bridges in Africa. One of the most impressive is the Maputo-Katempe Bridge in Mozambique, the longest suspension bridge in Africa, spanning over 3,000 meters. The vision to create this bridge started in 1989, when the World Bank produced an urbanization plan for Maputo, the capital city of Mozambique. The project was held off until 2008, when Portugal expressed interest in funding this project. However, the 2008 global financial crisis ultimately led to Portugal withdrawing from the project and opening the pathway for China to finally deliver this much-needed bridge. China broke ground in 2014 and completed the bridge in 2018 for a cost of $726 million. Immediately helping the 2.5 million residents who live in the immediate vicinity of the bridge. Now, I want to be completely transparent about China's Belt and Road Initiative and make sure that everyone understands that not every project has been a financial success. China has invested in over 1,300 projects across 149 countries around the world. It's inevitable that some projects will underperform or even fail, but China's BRI investments are like a diversified stock portfolio. Some stocks will outperform, some will underperform, and others will be just average. But since you hold a diversified portfolio, the result should be an overall increase in net worth. This is exactly what China is trying to do with the Belt and Road: build infrastructure projects to increase trade with China in the long term. One of the projects I would like to highlight is the Standard Gauge Railway in Kenya, connecting the port city of Mombasa to the capital city of Nairobi. Completed at a cost of $3.6 billion, this is Kenya's most expensive infrastructure project, and 90% of the railway was funded by loans from China's government. Initially, the project started off with great success. Railway construction saw over 30,000 new jobs created for Kenyan locals, and in the first year of operation, over 5.4 million passengers used the railway. However, despite improving transportation efficiency and reducing travel time and costs, the project has failed to become profitable, leaving the Kenyan government with a significant amount of debt to repay. Critics will argue this railway is being used by China to force Kenya into a debt trap, but these fears are baseless, as throughout the 10-year history of China's Belt and Road Initiative, China has never seized a single asset from a country who defaulted on a loan. For Kenya, building this railway was a needed investment. The only way for a nation to rise from poverty and enter the middle class is by expanding its infrastructure and creating more job opportunities for its local population. China itself has spent hundreds of billions constructing the world's longest and most connected high-speed railway inside of China. Many of these lines have also failed to turn a profit, but they represent an investment in the future. China was able to rise from one of the top 10 poorest countries in the world some 50 years ago to now being the world's second largest economy. One can only hope that Africa and its 54 nations can follow in the footsteps of China and achieve some of the economic prosperity and ultimately have a better quality of life. In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into why China is now Africa's leading trading partner and why it will remain a key economic partner for the future. I believe the days of funding mega projects like this $3.6 billion railway in Kenya are over. As the Belt and Road Initiative evolves, I think China will be more subjective with its spending and look to finance smaller and more sustainable projects. In addition, as China is the world's largest producer of renewable energy, I foresee China focusing its efforts on building more sustainable and green projects around the world. I'll leave you with one final quote from a fan who wrote me a great YouTube comment a couple months ago. Take a look. I'm from Zimbabwe. China is really helping our economy grow. The infrastructure that plagued our economy's growth are being financed and built by China and its companies. They came from gifting us one of the largest parliaments in Africa, and as a Zimbabwean, this truly makes me proud. Yes, things won't be perfect. However, China has facilitated the growth of our economy.